Oh, I'm sorry. I'm an empath. Hello and welcome to my review of Fate the Winx Saga. The show's been out for over a week now, and I've watched it about twice through, so I figure I would give my review as well as an analysis. I will be judging the show kind of in two categories. One on its own merit, and two how faithful it was to the show. I'm keeping these two categories separate because while there are going to be a lot of people coming to the show who are fans of the Winx Club, there are also going to be a lot of people coming to the show with no prior knowledge of the original cartoon. On the release day, Fate the Winx Saga was #2 on Netflix. I'm not sure what its ranking is going to be the day I post this though, but because it initially ranked so high upon release, I have to imagine there are going to be at least some viewers coming in who are not familiar with the original cartoon. So for anybody who does not want spoilers to the show, here's my spoiler-free review. It was just okay. The show is marketed as being a traditional YA fantasy show. I would argue there are also elements of YA dystopia in Fate the Winx Saga, and the shows are filled with cliches from both those genres. I am going to go more in depth into this opinion in my spoiler section, but I would say if I were to recommend this show to anybody, if you have young, kind of preteen, middle school aged kids who are just graduating from children's fantasy into YA or young adult, I would say they would enjoy the show. So I would say if your kid is between the age where they're old enough to understand that swearing is bad and you don't copy what characters do on TV in real life, but they're not old enough that they are already familiar with the cliches of YA fantasy and YA dystopian, I think this show would be good for them. Okay, but with the spoiler-free section out of the way, time to get into the spoiler section. Oh god, where do I begin? So the story is, like I said earlier, kind of a mishmash between traditional YA fantasy and then YA dystopia. YA fantasy and YA dystopia already have quite a bit of crossover when it comes to their storyline tropes. The barrier we can never cross, innumerable enemies without higher function thinking, adult figures or authority figures keeping secrets, are all present in YA fantasy and YA dystopia. The battle costumes for both the specialists and then the few fairies that we see in battle also lean more towards YA dystopia, although I do know it's been an industry-wide trend in YA fantasy as well to push towards a more neutral, utilitarian look in battle costumes. But back to the story itself, and by story, I mean the main overarching plot. I'm gonna talk about the character conflicts a little further on, but I'm talking about the main big plot of the season. And it's very predictable. I don't think you'll be very surprised or even all that interested in the plot if you are familiar with either YA dystopia or YA fantasy. They keep it somewhat interesting by distributing different pieces of information between their different members of their ensemble cast. But probably my biggest frustration with the storyline, even aside from all the cliches and the tropes, is the characters unwilling to disclose obvious information they should be disclosing in order to move the conflict forward. The most obvious example I can think of is when Bloom does not tell the other Winx girls that Farragonda promised she would tell Bloom about the history of her parents if only they were to wait a day, therefore overriding the chance for the rest of the main Winx to make an informed decision based on having all of the information. Because if all the other Winx girls had all of the complete information, I don't know if they would have gone along with helping Bloom, but obviously we can't have them know that information so they can move the conflict forward and free Rosalind. Another thing about the story that frustrated me was how few questions were answered by the end of the season. I'll try to summarize all of the new information we have compared to, let's say, the first episode, and tell me if you think this sounds like a complete season. So, the new information we have is Bloom is changeling, Bloom has dragon flame. And the story resolutions we got were, we almost know everything that happened at Astrodale, and the burned ones were stopped from attacking Alfea. And we know what happened with Stella and her previous roommate. Also, Sky and Bloom are something now, and the conflicts still open, not counting the twists presented at the end of the last episode, are Rosalind is still unleashed, Beatrix is still unleashed, Burned One's still out there, Bloom's parentage is still unknown. Dang! Now, tell me, does this sound like a complete season of a show to you? While this is a miniseries, a lot of miniseries have been able to tell complete stories within their runtime before. I think it was really bold of them to set up so much and then yet resolve so little by the end of season 1, assuming they would get a season 2. Now, in relation to the original cartoon, this story has almost nothing to do with the cartoon. Major story elements like the Burned Ones and Rosalind have nothing to do with the cartoon. Of all the major story beats, the very end where Rosalind gets Bloom to transform and get wings is probably the most faithful thing to the show, weirdly enough. It is stated on in the original Winx Club cartoon that magic is related to emotion, and a few of the transformations have centered around emotions. Although the way Bloom unlocks her fairy wings in Fate the Winx Saga is not as clear-cut as some of the transformation requirements have been in the Winx Club show, the way Rosalind was instructing her was sort of a more nebulous, let your emotions overcome you, dig deeper than you ever have before, which I feel is more of a cliche compared to the very specific requirements that Winx Club transformations had. I have a theory that when it comes to the show's lore, that this show was actually supposed to be like either an independent YA fantasy free from the Winx Club property, or it was supposed to be an adaptation of something else, and then Netflix just got a hold of the Winx Club property and slapped their name on it. I say this because so little of the lore has anything to do with the source material, but there's a lot of inspiration taken from Celtic mythology. Because the fairy lore in the show is fairly sound. It's not like they were picking and choosing elements from the show and then it didn't end up making sense. It's that they barely took anything from the mythology of the original show at all and just kind of chose their own built-in mythology. So yeah, this is pure speculation. I don't know if just the showrunners got inspired filming the Althea location in Ireland and wanted to throw in some Celtic references, or if this was supposed to be another show and then they got their hands on the Winx Club property and just slapped the name onto a show they were already working on. But that's my speculation. Now moving on to the characters. Our main character is obviously Bloom, and Bloom is very stereotypical insecure protagonist, but she's also very headstrong, and she's driven by a singular purpose, and that purpose is to find out who her parents really are. I'm not going to judge any of the acting performances in this show, because another theory I kind of have with the show is that they had a very tight budget, or like they had to film the show in a hurry for some reason because they only had the location for a certain amount of days. Again, budget, but there are some weird takes they left in this show, like actors not keeping focus with their scene partner in moments they really should be, or just weird cutaways in moments where I feel like we should be focusing on our character and their moment. So I don't know if that's an editing thing, an acting thing, because normally in moments where you just get a bad take in the moment, you can easily fix it with another take, but I guess they didn't. So I'm not gonna comment on any of their performances because I honestly don't know if this is an acting issue, an editing issue, or some kind of weird directional issue. But Bloom, obviously she's our main character. She has the most to do out of the main cast, and she's probably the one with the most consistent goals, which is more than I can say about some of the supporting cast. Her characterization in the Netflix adaptation, I would say it's actually fairly accurate to her characterization in the cartoon. She's very self-insert main character, is the fish out of water who has to be taught about this new world. However, I would say the one big difference is that cartoon Bloom actually had more of a temper than Netflix Bloom, and cartoon Bloom was definitely willing to be a lot more confrontational than Netflix Bloom. Now Stella is probably the biggest change between Netflix and cartoon. If I can describe what I think their intent was with the character, she is mean girl on the outside with a heart of gold on the inside. However, I think in execution, she comes off as more mean girl on the outside and the inside who only does a good thing after she realizes she's gone too far. It was cloudy and rainy to start with, and I've been filming for 3 hours. You're gonna get the nighttime lighting, I'm sorry. The fact that Stella lets Bloom borrow her teleportation ring, knowing that she'll go beyond the barrier where she could be attacked by burned ones, is honestly, in my opinion, irredeemable. Did I mention it was all over a boy? Because yes, the main character conflict between Stella and Bloom is that they are competing love interests for Sky. What makes this worse for her character is that other than being a romantic rival for Bloom, Stella really doesn't have much else to do until her conflict with her mother comes in about halfway through the season. And like I said, this is nothing like the Stella of the cartoon. Stella in the cartoon was a chatterbox who loved fashion but had a hard time focusing on her academics. And the thing about Stella in the cartoon versus Netflix Stella is when it comes to Stella's love of fashion in the cartoon, Stella was hardly ever judgmental about the other Winx girls' sense of style. But this version of Stella is really judgy. A lot of the Winx girls come off as really rude. I mentioned this in my live stream where I talked with some people on my live stream about Fate the Winx Saga, but it would make sense if everybody had been living in the suite for a while and they were all starting to get on each other's nerves. But the way the show presents it, it's like the girls have all just moved in and they're already like poking at each other, which then makes their turn to being friends at the end of the season all that more less believable, especially between Bloom and Aisha. I understand that Bloom and Aisha spend the most time together in the early episodes of the season, but the only scene where I really got a sense of friendship from them was the montage at the party scene, and then to have a major disagreement pretty soon after only to have it be forgiven almost immediately. The way they present it in the show, it's as if Bloom and Aisha were having like a minor tiff about something and they're just making up for it. But this is a major disagreement about whether they should unleash a powerful fairy back into the world. And I just think it deserved more gravity than the show really gave it. Now, unfortunately, I wish I could say I have more to say about Aisha, but I really don't. I feel out of all of the Winx girls, she got the least characterization out of everybody. She's sort of the caring mother figure who leans a little more authoritarian, obviously because she is the one who goes to Farragonda. Oh, I'm sorry, Faradowling. But other than that, we really don't know anything about Aisha herself other than she swims. Aisha in the cartoon was sporty, competitive, and she always pushed the Winx to do their best, but it was less so in a motherly way and more so pushing their abilities. So yes, out of all of the main Winx girls, I definitely think Aisha is the most underutilized. Now, Tara in the Netflix adaptation has a lot of what Stella's personality in the cartoon was. She's the one who gets caught going on and on a lot, except instead of Stella going on about fashion, it is Tara going on about plants. Tara falls into another common YA archetype of the really insecure girl of the group who is trying to get a boy's attention and then gets spurred for somebody who is perceived as prettier or more confident. Again, I talked about this in my initial live stream reacting to Fate the Winx Saga, but I don't really know if this is a trope. But I've seen it enough where it's starting to annoy me personally, having the one plus-size girl be really insecure. I mean, at least they kept the fat jokes to a minimum. On my first watch through and then on the live stream, I couldn't really remember any fat jokes that stuck out in particular, but in my second watch through, I just realized that the ones that are there are sometimes so obtuse that they just flew over my head the first time watching through. One thing I will say I liked about Tara's character is I liked the few moments where she really stood up for herself to the point where it almost got a little extreme. Like the one scene, I think in the first episode, where she starts choking Riven out, I wanted to see more of that. I know that would potentially push Tara into another trope of the nice girl who got pushed too far, but with how much Tara gets insulted throughout the show, I think she's earned that turn at this point. Flora in the cartoon is also kind of a softer figure. I grew up with the 4Kids adaptation of the show, so I always think of Flora as having this very obvious, light, lilting voice.
You hungry, little bunny? Here, They're organic.
She was kind of the mother figure of the Winx group, and she also could really summon those moments of anger when she wanted to, usually when she's trying to protect her friends or plants or animals. Now, Musa! If you can't tell already, I'm like trying to do my best Musa cosplay. The clips are kind of falling down. These are actually, they're not butterfly clips, they're actually claw clips, but they're so tiny, like who could actually use these as claw clips? I have very mixed feelings about Netflix Musa. I feel like out of all of the characters, she has the most reason to be standoffish because of her powers as an empath. I said this on my live stream, but after the Shane Dawson controversy, I have a hard time when someone declares that loudly, I'm an empath. Not to say empaths don't really exist, they do. I just found it rather interesting that the way they chose to explain her powers is by having her say, I'm an empath, rather than I'm a mind fairy. But I feel there are a lot of questions raised about Musa's powers because we honestly don't know that much about her life before Althea. We obviously get the bombshell at the finale of the first season that her mom passed away last year, and that's why she was initially refusing the call to action in the finale. But the way Musa reacts so intensely to literally everybody's emotions around her, it makes me wonder, like, was she around other people growing up? Like, what was going on there? Because if her reactions to other people's emotions are this obvious, unless she spent her childhood completely in isolation, you would think that this is something that either her parents or magical tutors or whatever would have caught on to early on, and she would have a better hold on her powers by now. Like, Bloom, the reason why she doesn't have a hold on her powers is understandable because she grew up on Earth, but Musa grew up in the magical realm or the other world or wherever we're calling it now. So it's not like she was unaware of her powers till now. It's just there's a lot of questions raised because we just don't have a lot of information on her.
Hello, editing me here. Wow, it's been a while since you've seen me in pajamas. When I was filming, I initially thought I wasn't going to be talking about the whitewashing in the show at all, since I've literally mentioned it in every other Fate the Winx Saga video I've made. But then I realized that there might be people coming into this video who have not watched my other videos. So to summarize the points I made in those other videos, yes, whitewashing is bad. They should have cast people of color in the respective roles, but please do not harass the actors, because they probably had nothing to do with that decision. If you would like to hear me talk about that more, I have my other Winx Club videos linked in a playlist down below. Now back to the video.
And then, of course, the other major aspect of her character is her budding relationship with Tara's brother, which, it was okay. That's all I really have to say about it. It's clearly meant to be a side plot, which is why I'm not too bothered about the fact that they didn't give much attention to it. She dates Tom, doesn't want roommate to find out she's dating the brother, tells her, finds out, Tara's okay with it, and then she saves him at the end. Pretty basic. Musa in the cartoon was somewhat similar to Netflix Musa. They're both a little naturally abrasive and standoffish, and obviously it's tough to compare Netflix Musa's relationship with Tom to cartoon Musa's relationship with Riven, because those are just two totally different guys, honestly opposites. While in the cartoon, Musa and Riven were constantly butting heads. In the Netflix adaptation, while it's clear that Musa is the more dominating personality out of the two of them, it's not like there's any conflict over that dynamic, at least not yet. So yeah, speaking of the boys. So we have Sky, Riven, Dane, and Sam. Sky and Riven are from the cartoon, whereas Dane and Sam are new creations for the show. I'm sure everybody's gonna want me to talk about Sky first, but I need to talk about Dane first. What the fuck was going on with Dane? He's like friends with Tara and maybe kind of interested in Tara, but then Riven's also bullying him, but also flirting with him, and he might be interested in Riven, and then he's kind of friends with Beatrix, but he also might be into Beatrix. He was like the most wishy-washy character of the whole show, and he's like the character that I need the most answers on. Now, let's talk about the one everybody wants me to talk about, Sky. In concept, I like the idea that they've given the original Winx Club boys a little bit more to do, because in the cartoon, they were kind of just boy toys. sometimes literally. But they did probably the most boring, obvious thing you can do with a main leading man, and that's pit him between two leading ladies and have the conflict just be, which one will he choose? Other than that, he's pretty much the Sky we know from the main cartoon. He's kind of a goody two-shoes. He's very simple, straightforward, milquetoast, but reliable. But I will have to say, I did not believe how quickly Sky forgave Bloom basically drugging him at the stone circle. I could believe maybe like an easy peace between them at the end of the first season, but going so far as to have Bloom kiss him at the end, that wasn't earned. I didn't no. Oh man, I am really getting loopy. I've been filming for a long time. I'm really hungry. I have a Costco muffin waiting for me downstairs when I'm done, so let's keep going. So Sam. Not really much to say about Sam. He's Tara's brother and he's dating Musa. Also, he gets infected by a burn one as like a ticking time bomb element in the finale. Which brings up the question, do people who get infected by burn ones turn into burned ones? This is something I should have brought up in the plot section that I didn't, but I'm bringing it up now. Because in the finale, when Bloom takes out all those burned ones with her transformation powers, they clearly turn back into humans, even though they're dead humans. And the ticking time bomb, both with Saul being infected and then Sam being infected, it's very clear that they have to get the infection under control. Because there's like I said, ticking time bomb element. The infection is spreading. We have to work fast. Ticking time bomb. But does it mean they'll turn into burned ones? Or would they just die? I don't know if this was ever answered in the show. But yeah, Sam is the most minor out of all of the guys, so there's the least to say about him. Now Riven. I already didn't like Riven from the cartoon, but this Riven is worse. He's like all of the show's worst impulses rolled into one character. And on one hand, I get he's supposed to be the bully douchebag of the guys, so most of the fat jokes lobbed at Tara are from him. But on top of that, there's this like weird homophobic undertone. He questions Dane's sexuality multiple times, and I'm not sure if it was Riven trying to make fun of Dane, Riven genuinely asking about Dane's sexuality, or Riven projecting his own questioning sexuality onto Dane. Whatever they were attempting, it just slid right into homophobia. And if Riven and Dane are only maybe not straight people, and by the end of season 1 they're on the bad guy side, then this is not the representation I want. Speaking of bad guys, I have not mentioned Beatrix. I said I wasn't gonna comment on performance, but I do say I have to applaud Beatrix's actress for getting through some of those lines, because I feel her character gets some of the worst written lines out of everybody, and she powers through it, man. She kind of does this like hammy, mysterious villain thing, and while some of the dialogue makes it kind of annoying how much she avoids literally any questions about her, I generally enjoyed her character, and I think that has more to do with the actress's performance than from the writing itself.
When comparing Beatrix to the cartoon, honestly, there isn't really much to say. She's clearly a wink and nod reference to the tricks, with even a little bit of later season villain Selena thrown in there, but her actual function in the story is not related in any way to any previous villains from the cartoon. The only parallel to the cartoon I could really see is that she is working for a greater force, which is often what the tricks do in the later seasons of the cartoon.
Now, final category are the adults. So that's kind of like the semi-side plot thing going on with Silva, Farrah Dowling, and then Professor Harding. And while their characters function well as like leaders, figureheads, the fact that they hide so much information from the students makes no sense, other than to obviously stir up conflict. It's definitely the YA trope of the adults are made somewhat more incompetent to make the kids look better, because the adults basically trying to hide the whole history of the school from the students. That's not sustainable. I think the only reason we accept this so much is because it's become such an embroiled trope, in particularly, again, YA fantasy and YA dystopia. But yeah, whew, that was all the characters. Wow, that was a lot. But I'm gonna quickly touch upon production value. Again, my theory was that either this show was made on a really tight budget or it was really rushed, because we really only stick to the Althea setting and then maybe 1 or 2 scenes at Bloom's house. For a fantasy show, the locations are surprisingly limited, and there's a lot of just scenes of people running around in the woods, which, if you're familiar with indie film, a lot of times means we don't have money to shoot anywhere else but the woods, so we're gonna shoot in the woods.
Well, it's like you mentioned Don Doler earlier, where it's like a Don Doler movie. It's like, oh, there's an alien in the woods. We're going to be in this woods for the rest of the movie, and characters are just going to be running around the woods.
It also makes the world seem very small. The fact that of the other world, we really only see Althea and then just beyond the barrier. Like, we hear about Celeria and Heraklion, but we never see any of it. I personally feel that visual element of locations is a very important thing in YA fantasy, and this is honestly what makes it more YA dystopian in this way, because in YA dystopia, it's more common to have locations really closed off or only set to certain parameters. I would maybe be more forgiving if Althea was maybe a more dynamic, interesting location, like, say, like Hogwarts, for example. But the interiors of Althea feel really bare. Like, the only place I felt had really good set dressing was Farrah Dowling's office. So yeah, I don't know what was going on there. Maybe if they get a season 2, they'll get a bigger budget? But yeah, that was all of my thoughts on Fate the Winx Saga. I need to return these headphones. They're my dad's, and they actually don't even fit me. They like hit the bottom of my ear right here. But my ears are like higher up on here. But if you made it all the way to the end, thank you so much. Let me know what you think of Fate the Winx Saga down below, and I will see you next time. Oh, and let me push you back so I can show you my like full outfit. So yeah, I've got like this kind of crop top thing going on. It's like, it's probably my shortest crop top, actually. And then I have some authentic 2000s bootcut jeans. They're not quite authentic 2000s. I bought them in like 2013, I want to say. I actually do have a pair of authentic 2000s bootcut jeans, but they're 16 kids, and so I don't fit them anymore. Yeah, I tried with the little clips. I did, but my hair just kind of died as the video went on, especially. Oh well. But yeah, thanks for watching.